And thank you for tuning in to Love Kills by Hank Harrison, read by Bradley Dahlberg, 2024. We are finally now up to Chapter 9. We're in Inhumane Bondage. The secret of life is meaningless unless you discover it yourself. W.S. Somerset of The Human Bondage. They only lived together in the new house on Lake Washington Drive for a few months, but Kurt and Courtney settled into a married routine, taking care of the baby and reading a lot of books. On a typical evening at home, magazines were strewn on the new Serta Perfect King, while the television softly flickered in an adjacent room. To those two broadcast-addicted kids, the symbolic TV provided pink and white noise, filling the role of the fireplace in another era. One of their fired housekeepers described an interesting scene. In an easy chair, Kurt pored over Toni Morrison's beloved Stopping to Pen the Words Umbilical Noose in margin. And after checking on the baby, he returned to the room that would soon become his library to finish unpacking boxes once stashed at his dad's house in Aberdeen. He picked up W.S. Somerset Maughams of Human Bondage, and for the umpteenth time, according to a reliable source, Kurt rented the Bette Davis Paul Henreid film version and Kim Novak Lawrence Harvey flick when Courtney was away. He must have sensed that the love-sick relationship described by Maugham held lessons for him. He knew he was in trouble as soon as they moved into the big house. He did not feel at home there. While 10 different thoughts buzzed into Kurt's head, Courtney sprawled on the bed, alternating between the sapphic poetry and the Dionysian intoxicants of the Camille Pagella. Although Kurt had eclectic tastes, Courtney read almost nothing but feminist literature, a course of literary pursuit stranding her somewhere between Nabokov's Lyota and Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar. Courtney once told me she couldn't understand why Sylvia Plath killed herself when she could have blocked out her pain by killing her beekeeping father. This trend started when she fought with Kat Bjelland over George Plimpton's early book. With Jean Stein on Eddie Sedgwick, the tragic debutante Warhol, who died for no cause whatsoever. A 1990 book, Please Kill Me, The Uncensored History of Punk, lay open on the dog-eared near the reading rack in the master bedroom. According to the same source, an acquaintance of Tracy Mandar, Kurt's girlfriend from Olympia, the household was rarely peaceful. I believe Kurt's marriage vows forced him into a psychic dependency, and he didn't want to argue with Courtney because his mom and dad argued, sometimes violently. Kurt's relationship with Tracy was never based on dominance or psychic tension. Tracy loved Kurt with her heart and all of her heart of a hometown girl. Friends in Boston told me that he had similar feelings for Mary Lou Lord, and again he sensed a softer vibe with Kristen Path. Although there was no sensual side to the relationship, just sympathy and fun. Kurt may have been harboring a collaboration fantasy because of all these women, with the exception of Tracy, there were real musicians. All of those women were real. While Courtney was a freak of many genders, her NorCal mentor, Francie Warson, helped her realize that she could control men by humiliating them and putting them down and calling them every bad name in the book. This worked on Cobain's masochistic streak, but beyond humiliation, Courtney added a level of tension that could be only played out. I suspect in a fight to the death, featuring hypodermic syringes at 20 paces, she knew she would win. She did this several times before with me, with her stepfathers, with her shrinks, with James Moreland. The list goes on long, and they were all practice sessions for the big finale, the great song Robbery. Kurt and Courtney had nothing in common politically. They were both terribly conflicted. Courtney migrated towards her mother's opportunistic stance, i.e. liberal until the pain starts, then dress up and pass for conservative. Kurt was far further to the left, at least on the surface. He was influenced by Chris Novoselic's Trotskyite leaning and Zappa's surrealism, but he was blown away by Bill Burroughs' dotty rich boy conservative junkie style and his own Greek tragedy of Nor drama, circling around the rejection of wealth, and the rejection of wealth issue stood as an anathema to Courtney. Throughout the relationship, Kurt's point pens, yellow legal pads, his fame, his soul, diverted from the constructive uses and instead put to work as the sounding boards to carry out Courtney's vendettas. Her band acted as the pulpit, to be sure, but preaching for her to the Fox Corps was very much like preaching to the choir. She needed to project her venomous rants to a much larger audience, and she planned to do so by co-opting Nirvana's big fan base. All she had to do was control Kurt, then leapfrog with her own band. Unfortunately, the plan was a bit delusional. Not only was Nirvana's audience big, it was full of men, unconverted chauvinists, and the blue-collar dudes remained unanointed by the snake oil and the advance of the Riot Grrrl medicine kit. For Courtney, casting her occasional profound insights into the global cauldron took on a kind of missionary zeal. Her anti-father IRE ranged from the take your daughter to work obligation to the full-fledged castration campaign depending upon her postpartum hormonal imbalance on any given day. When she married Kurt, her almost demented hatred for men manifested itself in an old, surefire concept, the trophy baby. Everybody knows about the pimp with the Norwegian airline stewardess on his arm, but how many people can actually use their own kids as props and fake their act? Courtney dragged the baby on stage every chance she got. Kurt opposed this stunt, but couldn't stop it. A feigned avoidance of the paparazzi was also part of the act, both before and after Kurt died. Courtney habitually exposed the wee princess to the cameras at every possible venue and complained about it. Not as much as to inspire the other Riot girls to settle down and have babies, but to use the child as a power tool, a symbol of creative overkill, an icon to which gain a foothold upon the rock and roll mountain, the gold mountain, maybe even to snub her nose at Madonna. When Courtney married Kurt, she was right to insist that the media style her as a rock star, not as a Yoko Ono clone. Yoko, like Courtney, milked sympathy from the crowd by using Sean Lennon as child power, but Courtney always denied she was anything like Yoko. She even insisted on a prenup to prove that her purity and devotion. When Courtney was 15, she wanted to be famous, and it didn't matter for what. The more that she burned down Portland, LA, San Francisco, Liverpool, and New York, the more people remembered her. After she met Kurt, she did not quietly sit back and rule from a distance like Yoko. Heck no. Courtney was right up in the front, and Cobain got pushed into the background wherever they went. Even in restaurants, Courtney upstaged Kurt. Around that time, when they were off the road, Kurt would quietly sneak up to the Vancouver, BC to take time-up lessons from Lance Regan Deal, an old friend and guitar master living in Eagle Harbor, less than 70 miles away. This, of course, was before Lance started a blues guitar revolution in Korea. Kurt always came home from these overnights with a smile on his face, and Courtney just knew he had a girlfriend stashed somewhere. The only girlfriend he had on those trips with a new appreciation of music, but try telling that to a paranoid. Kurt insisted it was just a guitar lesson coupled with the workings on songs and chords over a few beers out on the West Vancouver. But Courtney wouldn't buy it. She had no idea at the time that Lance was helping Kurt formulate the Jag Stang, as well as giving him the kind of encouragement he needed. Again, she increased her vigilance level, insisting that the next time he went for a lesson, he would need to be escorted by Callie or one of her secondary controlees. She claimed Kurt was putting himself into jeopardy by crossing the border unguarded. Collaborating on songs with Kurt was all a part of Courtney's master plan. She didn't want anybody with brains like Lance Deal butting in. How else could she going to learn Kurt's entablature and grunge riffs? Back in 1984, she told me she wanted to marry a rock star and write music. She worked up with Roz Resbed on songs. She worked with James Moreland and later Billy Corgan on songs, and she worked with all of the chicks in Babes in Toyland and L7 on songs. She was a mind like a sponge, so when her first CD came out, I wasn't surprised. She told us in a darker mood that she wanted to kill herself, a rock star, and retire early. She even wrote poetry about it. We thought she was kidding. After Kurt died, I realized how vivid of all this teeny bopper crap really was. The most surprising was how completely smitten Kurt had become. He couldn't see Courtney's sidling from the Coupe de la Tête. From the heart-shaped box came out, I realized Courtney was influenced in their collaborations. When she had been collecting heart-shaped boxes since she was 6, writing for Nirvana's audience must have pumped her up. She rationalized all of her moves by saying that she was the woman that couldn't catch a break any other way. Courtney's takeover strategy started in 1984 with fanzines. Contrary to the official story, she knew about Kurt as early as 1987 when Janet Billing, the Babes in Toyland publicist at Caroline Records, mentioned that Nirvana were crashing at her apartment in New York. The idea that they first met in Portland is very shifty. The song Drain You is Kurt's read of something Courtney told him during their honeymoon. I will drain you. At least she gave him ample warning. With this needle I thee wed. There can be no doubt Courtney had an influence on Kurt's body and mind, and heart, and music. Give me 1 second here. As if Heart-Shaped Box wasn't proof enough, the lyrics to several other songs gave me the shakes. Frances Farmer, Will Have a Revenge on Seattle, took on a remnant of a battle cry. The song's title was derived from Kurt's lyrics. Not exactly. It was a declaration of war. Courtney's war. She watched the Frances Farmer story at my house obsessively long before she met Cobain, and she made me buy the tape to have on file so she could come around to visit. That Easterhead, Pretty in Pink, Rocky Horror Show, and a few other teenage angst movies from 1984 onward, 5 years before she claims she first met Cobain. Courtney was obsessed with Frances Farmer. How do I know? She wrote about Frances Farmer in the story when she lived with us in 1983. She watched it over and over again and took copious notes saying that she was writing a song for her band, Sugar Babylon. She asked me if a lobotomy could really work. Obviously, she identified with the martyrdom of the ill-fated movie star. In case you didn't know, Frances Farmer, the 1950s movie star, was forced to undergo a lobotomy in Seattle after a long illegal incarceration. Likewise, Courtney was forced into rebirthing a ritual in Portland. She had some real understanding of the Aratsy psychiatric practices of the Northwest. She told me her mother had Rolf run through an Oregon box, walked over hot coals, and chanaffed to the point of virtual insanity. As soon as she had a chance, Courtney would show up in Seattle to take revenge for herself, for Frances Farmer, for all the riot girls harmed by the stupidity of the older generations. She even named my grandfather Francis. She even named my granddaughter Frances, not my grandfather. The point should be obvious to anyone familiar with the facts. By January of 1994, just before Kurt was to embark on the big European tour, his last tour, Courtney's violent asteroid continued to cut the path through the grunge firmament, leaving a trail destructive as it wiped through the dinosaurs. Once she excoriated Kurt. Once she broke up Nirvana by remote control, and once she pretty much turned out 30 million people against her, she went back to extracting her revenge on Roz, me, and anybody in her rearview mirror. And as a father, Kurt was a benevolent dictator, angry with his dad for taking a government job, and a beatific towards his fans for accepting his musical gifts, but he loved his kid. His personality was perfectly passive-aggressive, the type Courtney loved to manipulate. He was able to live with the paradox and contradiction. He fought against censorship in his music and yet censored a number of writers, poster artists, and photographers at Courtney's behest. But the bondage fantasy and his love for women who had helped carry it out also put him into a number of dangerous conflicts. Kurt hated fag bashers, bootleggers, pedophiles, rapists, and wife-beaters, but he wasn't sure how to deal with the mutant man-haters and the woman's movement. When Courtney went hog wild over Susan Flauty's book, Backlash, Kurt went along with the program, but Like Kat Bjelland, he held a deep reservations for most of Lottie's ideas, expressed elsewhere in women's literature. See Lesbian Nation, Ruby Fruit Jungle, Our Bodies, Ourselves. And generalizable to non-gender specific repression, something anyone who produces writings in music and art can understand, but will be held to disdain for the bad guys. He has also found himself in the role of the battered husband, especially after Courtney hit him a couple of times. She denies this, but my sources back me up. Courtney seems to have used the woman's movement as an excuse to beat the crap out of men. Kurt's wife was fast becoming a hardian, a harpy, who envied anybody who looked happy but wasn't inside. Nothing Kurt did could make her happy. You might think that being the most famous woman in the rock scene would be enough, or maybe being married to the most charismatic pop star in the world, or having a cute, healthy baby, wads of money would be enough, but not my Courtney. Her libido was definitely not a mosquito. As a husband, Kurt was a prayer-saying man. Cheating was immoral in his eyes. While Courtney was amoral, she wasn't immoral. She just didn't have any of the dissonance here is frightening. Plotty justified suppressing men as a reparation for thousands of years of bravado. Even though anthropologists are unclear about the role definition in the Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon populations, we know the Celts were matrilineal, as they are Inuit, to name only a few widely dispersed examples. Like a lot of stuff in Flotty's book, the facts don't mesh. Oddly, and perhaps by accident, Flotty's rap sounds a lot like the conflict Courtney had with Kat Bjelland and Brandy Miller. When I first met Kat, she was a dyed-in-wool heterosexual. She loved men. She loved being supportive, wifey and sisterly, even to the point of marrying Stuart Gray, a typical Aussie Bruce, who preferred his Sheilas, passive. I'm not sure how supportive Courtney was when Kat and Stu were in the studio doing recordings as a new band, known briefly as Crunt, a synthesis which went almost nowhere, but they were happy for a while. Courtney was never really happy. Only about a quarter of what Courtney says is true, but nobody usually bothers to decipher which are the lies. She's all about image. Courtney's delusional. I called her a while ago and I was worried about her baby and her sanity, but I never heard back from her. Kat Bjelland. The Carnation Cave residence and the music came out of it in early 1993 was laced with some pretty heavy heroin abuse, and Kat began to turn toward the various Babes in Toyland projects. Turns out of Gray, who paraded out as Stu Spasm in the stage world, and was a non-runner, and the two broke up about as quick as the spin in the bottle game. The conflicted marriage and her devotion to Babes in Toyland tore her apart. I believe the strain started her on a downhill slide, aided by Courtney's vast grenade of bullshit. She's fine now, but she went through a reported psychiatric break in 2007, had a healthy son, went back on tour with Babes and Maureen Herman in 2014, and stayed away from Courtney, but she knew what happened the night Kurt died. She knew what happened because she was there. During the Sugar Babylon days in 1982 and 1983, Kat loved hanging around with Courtney, but Courtney was over the edge and sang badly and tried to dominate the rap, and probably stole gate money from the Butthole Surfers gig. Not proven in Minneapolis by 1985, Kat and Babes had to kick Courtney out of their zone in band terms. Getting kicked out means being shunned. The other women and Babes just couldn't feel comfortable with Courtney's anger trip. Kat was a screamer, but she was really screaming for the devil, and screaming was just a showbiz for her. Controversially, Courtney made a big point of her bisexuality. A widely reported wars between Kat and Courtney over the invented, the baby doll, or the Kinder whore look was really a war over the baby doll look was going to represent. Was it going to be enigmatic or straight on? Was it bisexual? Was it going to look but don't touch? Just a frilly frock, or a paradoxical come and get it symbol? In Courtney's mind, it was also a war over bragging, bitching, and bitching rights, especially after Emma Kang cloned the look and made it a fortune on it. After Christmas 1993, Courtney didn't care much about Kurt's feelings. Her flow chart was nearing a major action point. As soon as she realized she had a good record in the can, she grew more remote, cold, unloving, and Kurt grew lonelier. By the minute, he probably did contemplate suicide. Who wouldn't? I know I did, but I'm not convinced every single time he considered taking his own life, the baby's face popped up and he went back to his music. Like all creative geniuses, he realized his art was the raft upon which he could float over turbulent seas. Fast forward journal entry, June 8th, 1996. Courtney told reporters in Seattle she wouldn't burn down the greenhouse if Kurt's fans, told reporters in Seattle she would burn down the greenhouse if Kurt's fans didn't stop pestering her. Later, she modified that statement to say that she would have it tore down. She seems to be acting nuttier than ever. Arson's on her mind. Last week she was busted in Bale Coy's bookstore in an adult section for hiding copies of Melissa Rossi's book, Courtney Love, Queen of the Noise, behind the gay porn books. What was in the books? That Courtney didn't want anyone to see. Melissa knew Courtney in Portland and nailed her down by the exhaustive analysis. Kurt was not in a healthy state of mind when he finally formulated the divorce plan, but he was also sick of being with Courtney's whipping boy. After they were married, every time Courtney needed to reach out to hurt someone, she could just slap Kurt over the head, or the latest lesbian affair, or the latest boy toy, or her latest humiliation rap, and Kurt would be forced to dismiss it or be accused of homophobia. Kurt would then sulk or go on the road, and Courtney would feel hard done by and get self-indulgent. This led to more orgies, as more dalliances, sleepovers, and more zipless fucks on airplanes. Kurt hated his own addiction. He knew it was bad for Francis, but he was caught up in his responsibilities to the band and music. Even he dissolved the band. He would still be sneered in Courtney's net. Courtney's black moods, which he plainly documented in Heart-Shaped Box, and her poorly thought-out attacks on enemies perceived real. He also hated her sexual addiction. But where Kurt was a simple heroin and nicotine addict, Courtney was strung out on her own cerebellum, strung out on everything addicting. She was strung out on hatred. She hated food and fat people, and not realizing a lot of overweight people are generously predispositioned. I think she hated models, because models can keep their figures without much metabolic turmoil. She also had hatred, and she also had some sense of guilt over hating everything. She hated smoking, and then her lips made this unusual sucking cups to suck. From the days of the vats to the teardrop explodes LSD days with Julian Cope and Adam Ant and the Mantax Hotel in Liverpool, she wallowed in excesses that would put Caligula to shame. These bizarre scenes, long a staple on the Hollywood freak circuit, continued as long as Courtney would be the center of attention. In her mind, she was just doing business, but Kurt wanted her to cool it. Kurt figured cheating is cheating whether you're gay, straight, or in an orgy. He told his friend in Seattle he didn't like the babysitters Courtney was hiring. Courtney envied anyone in control of her own destiny. Anyone with money who wouldn't give her any, and anyone in general who wouldn't fall to her act. She would now seek ultimate power, and she would rule her own destiny. She would marry a Russian oligarch, or a British plutocrat, and live happily ever after, or maybe not. Too many people knew the details of her past in almost every major capital, especially in London, where Camilla Parker Bowles, the future queen of the consort, had spies on Courtney's tail everywhere she went. And that was the end of Chapter 9. We are going to get our way through this book as much as we can. Make sure, if you like this kind of content, to like, share, and subscribe. This is Bradley Dahlberg, 2024, Straight Dog 90 across all other media platforms. Don't forget to check out Dahlberg Music whenever you can, and share this with all your friends and family if you love audio true stories.